The grand ballroom shimmered with elegance as Mira and Dalton celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. The atmosphere was filled with joy, laughter, and music. Mira, dressed in a stunning sapphire gown that complemented her sparkling eyes, greeted the guests with grace. Her husband, Dalton, stood by her side, his presence commanding yet warm. The celebration seemed perfect until the arrival of an unexpected guest, Michael, an old acquaintance from Mira's past, along with his wife, Selena. As Michael stepped into the room, his tall, confident demeanor turned heads, but none more so than Mira's. Her breath hitched momentarily, not out of love, but surprise. The man she had once thought would be her forever was now standing in front of her after years of silence. Dalton, ever observant, noticed Mira's reaction. His jaw tightened, and a pang of jealousy crept into his chest. Although he trusted Mira, the sight of her startled expression unsettled him. Throughout the evening, Dalton kept a close watch, his smile never quite reaching his eyes as Michael and Selena approached to offer their congratulations. "Congratulations, Mira," Michael said, his voice smooth yet tinged with something unspoken. "Thank you," Mira replied, keeping her tone polite and distant. Selena, ever the socialite, chimed in, "Your home is beautiful, Mira, and your children are adorable. You're truly blessed." Mira forced a smile, exchanging pleasantries, while Dalton's arm instinctively tightened around her waist. The moment passed quickly, but the tension lingered. Later that night, as the party wound down, Mira found herself standing alone on the balcony, staring at the city lights. She was lost in thought, memories of her past with Michael flooding back. They had once been inseparable, or so she thought. His ambition and her dreams had collided, leaving their love story in ruins. Dalton joined her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with curiosity. Mira turned to him, her eyes soft. "Just thinking about how far we've come. Honorable tonight reminded me of the past, but it's nothing compared to what we've built together." Dalton nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Michael seemed different. "Did seeing him again bother you?" Mira shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, I was just surprised. It's been so long, and honestly, I didn't expect to see him again. But whatever we had is buried in the past. You're my present and my future, Dalton." Dalton leaned in, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Good, because I don't share, Mira." She laughed softly, appreciating his possessiveness in that moment. Still, as they walked back inside, Dalton's mind raced. He trusted Mira, but the reappearance of someone from her past, especially someone as charismatic as Michael, left him on edge. The next morning, Dalton couldn't shake the lingering tension from the previous night. He found himself watching Mira closely as she went about her day, her laughter with their children bringing him momentary peace. However, when Michael sent a polite text thanking them for the evening, Dalton's jealousy flared. He said nothing to Mira but spent the day brooding, torn between his trust in her and the irrational insecurity gnawing at him. Meanwhile, Mira was oblivious to Dalton's internal struggle. She spent the afternoon organizing the children's school schedules and planning their upcoming vacation. When Dalton finally brought up Michael during dinner, Mira was caught off guard. "You seemed distracted last night," Dalton said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Mira blinked. "Distracted? How so?" "With Michael," he said, his jaw tightening. Mira set her fork down, realizing where this conversation was headed. "Dalton, are you jealous?" "I'm not jealous," he replied quickly, though his tone betrayed him. Mira leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Han, I told you last night, whatever I felt for Michael ended a long time ago. You're the only one who matters to me now." Dalton studied her face, searching for any hint of dishonesty, but all he saw was sincerity. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I trust you, Mira. I do. But seeing him last night, it brought out something I didn't expect." Mira reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Dalton, You have nothing to worry about. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." Her reassurance eased his tension, but Dalton silently vowed to keep an eye on Michael, just in case. A week had passed since the anniversary party, and life at the Sullivan household seemed to have returned to normal. Mira was busy with her responsibilities at home, shuttling the kids to their activities and managing household affairs. Dalton, however, couldn't shake the unease that lingered in his mind. One morning, Mira received a message from Selena, inviting her to lunch. "Selena wants to catch up," Mira said casually over breakfast. "She mentioned Michael might join us, but it's really her idea. She seems lovely." Dalton's grip on his coffee mug tightened imperceptibly. "Are you going?" "I think so," Mira replied. "It's just lunch, Dalton. Besides, I'd like to get to know her better. She seems kind." Dalton forced a nod, masking his discomfort. He knew he couldn't forbid her from going. It wasn't his style, but the idea of Mira spending time with Michael left a sour taste in his mouth. Later that afternoon, as Mira prepared to leave, Dalton leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low and laced with a mixture of admiration and possessiveness. Mira smiled, stepping closer to him. "Thank you. Honorable, don't worry, it's just lunch. I'll be back before you know it." As she left, Dalton stood by the window, watching her car disappear down the driveway. His thoughts raced. Why does this bother me so much? He wondered, knowing the answer lay in his deep love for her and the fear of losing her. Mira arrived at the upscale cafe Selena had chosen and spotted her waving from a corner table. Michael was seated beside her, his presence commanding yet relaxed. As Mira approached, Selena greeted her warmly, pulling her into a quick hug. "Mira, it's so good to see you again," Selena said with a genuine smile. "Michael and I were just talking about how wonderful your anniversary party was." "Thank you," Mira replied, taking a seat. Her gaze flicked to Michael briefly before she turned her attention back to Selena. Throughout the meal, Selena dominated the conversation, sharing stories about her life and asking Mira about her children. Michael chimed in occasionally, his tone friendly but measured. Mira couldn't help but notice how different he seemed from the man she once knew. More polished, more composed. Toward the end of the lunch, Selena excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Mira and Michael alone. "So," Michael began, his tone light, "how have you been, Mira? Truly?" Mira hesitated, then smiled. "I've been good, Michael. Life isn't perfect, but it's full. Dalton and the kids, they're my everything." Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve happiness." Mira shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to respond. Thankfully, Selena returned, breaking the moment. When lunch ended, Mira said her goodbyes and drove home, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't deny the odd sense of closure she felt from the encounter, but she also knew she'd have to explain it all to Dalton, and she wasn't sure how he'd react. That evening, as Mira set the table for dinner, Dalton walked in, his expression unreadable. "How was lunch?" he asked casually, though Mira could hear the tension in his voice. "It was fine," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Selena is lovely, and we had a good time catching up." "And Michael?" Dalton asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Mira sighed, placing the last plate on the table. "He was there, yes, but it wasn't about him, Dalton. Selena invited me, and I thought it would be rude to decline." Dalton crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "Did he say anything to you? Anything inappropriate?" Mira frowned, stepping closer to him. "No, Honorable, he was polite. We barely spoke, honestly. Selena did most of the talking." Dalton studied her, his gaze intense. "I trust you, Mira, but I don't trust him. Men like Michael, they don't just move on without looking back." Mira reached out, placing a hand on his chest. "Dalton, you're the only man in my life. Whatever I felt for Michael is long gone. I need you to believe that." His expression softened, but the tension didn't completely leave his body. "I do believe you, Mira. I just can't help the way I feel." Later that night, as Mira lay beside him in bed, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of a deeper issue. She loved Dalton with all her heart, but Michael's unexpected reappearance seemed to have struck a nerve she hadn't anticipated. Dalton, meanwhile, lay awake, vowing to protect his marriage at all costs. He didn't know what Michael's intentions were, but he was determined not to let anyone come between him and Mira. Days turned into a week, but Dalton's uneasiness lingered. Mira noticed it, though she chose to avoid addressing it directly. She hoped that time would ease his concerns. However, fate seemed to have other plans. One evening, the family was attending a charity gala organized by one of Dalton's business partners. Mira was radiant in an elegant navy blue gown that hugged her figure perfectly. Dalton couldn't take his eyes off her as they entered the grand ballroom. "You look stunning tonight," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. Mira smiled warmly, squeezing his arm. "And you, as always, look dashing." The night was going smoothly until they crossed paths with Selena and Michael. Mira froze for a second, her fingers tightening around Dalton's arm. Selena beamed and approached them, pulling Mira into a quick embrace. "Mira, Dalton, what a lovely surprise," Selena exclaimed. Dalton's eyes narrowed slightly as Michael approached, his movements deliberate but calm. "Dalton," Michael said, extending a hand, "it's good to see you again." Dalton hesitated for a split second before shaking it. "Michael," he replied curtly. As the conversation flowed, Dalton couldn't help but notice how Michael's gaze occasionally flickered toward Mira. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to stoke the embers of his jealousy. Later, as Mira excused herself to use the restroom, Selena and Dalton were left in an awkward silence. Michael took the opportunity to speak. "You've got a remarkable woman, Dalton. Mira's always been special." Dalton's jaw tightened, and his voice was firm. "She's my wife, Michael. Let's not forget that." Michael smirked slightly, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Of course, Dalton. I meant no disrespect." But Dalton wasn't convinced. On the drive home, Dalton was unusually quiet. Mira glanced at him, sensing the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. "Dalton, are you okay?" she asked gently. He didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, "I don't trust him." "Michael?" Mira asked, already knowing the answer. Dalton nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "He acts polite, but there's something about the way he looks at you. It's not right." Mira sighed, reaching out to place a hand on his arm. "Han, you're reading too much into this. Michael's in my past, and that's where he'll stay. I only have eyes for you." Dalton pulled into the driveway and parked the car. Turning to her, he said, "I believe you, Mira, but I can't help how I feel. I need to protect what's mine." Mira smiled softly, leaning in to kiss him. "And I'm yours, Dalton. Always." Though her words reassured him momentarily, Dalton couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Michael had an ulterior motive. The following weekend, Dalton and Mira attended another social event, a fundraiser for a children's hospital. Mira volunteered to help with organizing and had been busy for weeks preparing. Dalton was proud of her dedication, but he also saw how it placed her in more social circles where she might run into Michael. As the evening unfolded, Dalton spotted Michael across the room, talking to some prominent figures. Dalton's jaw clenched, but he chose to stay close to Mira, his protective instincts kicking in. At one point, Michael approached Mira while Dalton was momentarily occupied with a conversation. "Mira," he said with a warm smile, "you've done an amazing job with this event. It's truly impressive." "Thank you, Michael," Mira replied politely. "It's a cause close to my heart." Michael's gaze softened. "You've always had a big heart. It's one of the things I admired about you." Mira's smile faltered slightly. "Michael, that was a long time ago. I'm happy with where my life is now, with Dalton and our children. I hope you understand that." Michael nodded, though his expression was unreadable. "Of course. I just wanted to let you know how proud I am of you. You've come so far, Before Mira could respond, Dalton appeared at her side, his presence commanding. "Michael," Dalton said coolly, his arms slipping around Mira's waist. "Enjoying the evening?" Michael smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I was just congratulating Mira on her hard work. She's truly remarkable." Dalton's grip on Mira tightened slightly. "She is, and she's mine." The tension between the two men was palpable, but Mira quickly diffused it by steering the conversation to lighter topics. Still, as they left the event, Dalton's mood was somber. At home, as they prepared for bed, Dalton finally spoke. "Mira, I need to know. Does he mean anything to you anymore?" Mira turned to him, her expression serious. "Dalton, you mean everything to me. Michael is a part of my past, nothing more. Please don't let this come between us." Dalton sighed, pulling her into his arms. "I trust you, Mira. It's him I don't trust. I just can't stand the thought of anyone taking you away from me." Mira cupped his face, her voice firm. "No one ever will, Dalton. I'm yours, now and forever." Though her words brought him some comfort, Dalton knew that his jealousy wasn't something he could simply ignore. He'd have to find a way to deal with it, or risk letting it consume him. The days following the fundraiser brought a peculiar calm, but beneath it simmered unresolved emotions. Dalton couldn't shake the lingering unease from seeing Michael's interactions with Mira. Meanwhile, Mira tried her best to reassure Dalton and focus on her work, but she could sense the tension building within him. One afternoon, while Mira was busy reviewing paperwork in the home office, Dalton walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been at it all morning," he said, placing the cup on her desk. Mira smiled up at him. "Thank you. Honorable, this project has been taking up so much of my time. I promise I'll be done soon." Dalton leaned against the edge of the desk, watching her closely. "You're amazing, you know that?" Mira chuckled, sipping her coffee. "What's this sudden flattery? Did something happen at work?" Dalton hesitated before responding. "Nothing at work. I've just been thinking about us." Mira set her cup down, her brow furrowed. "Dalton, what's on your mind?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's about Michael. I know you've told me over and over that he's part of your past, but seeing him again, it stirred something in me. I can't help but feel protective, maybe overly so." Mira reached for his hand, her touch gentle. "Dalton, I love you. I've built a life with you. Michael is a reminder of a different time, but that's all. Please don't let this insecurity get in the way of what we have." Dalton nodded, though his jaw tightened. "I'll try, but I need you to promise me something." "What is it?" "Promise me you'll tell me if he ever tries to cross a line." Mira's expression softened. "Of course, Dalton. You're my husband, my partner. There's nothing I wouldn't share with you." Though her words eased his fears momentarily, Dalton couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Michael wasn't done stirring the pot. One evening, Mira received a call from Selena, inviting her to lunch. "It'll be just us girls," Selena had said, her tone warm and inviting. Mira agreed, thinking it would be a nice break from her routine. The following day, Mira arrived at the restaurant and was surprised to find that Michael was also there, seated beside Selena. Her stomach flipped uncomfortably, but she composed herself and greeted them politely. "Mira," Selena exclaimed, hugging her tightly. "I hope you don't mind, but Michael decided to join us. He said he wanted to catch up with you too." Mira forced a smile. "Of course. It's nice to see you both." As the lunch progressed, Michael steered the conversation toward memories of their shared past. "Remember that time in college when we got locked out of the library?" he asked with a chuckle. Mira nodded politely, though she felt uneasy. "Yes, that was a long time ago." Selena, oblivious to the tension, chimed in. "You two must have had so many fun memories together." Mira shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her watch. "It's getting late. I should head home. Dalton will be waiting for me." Michael's expression faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Of course. It was nice seeing you, Mira." As Mira drove home, She couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's intentions weren't as innocent as he pretended. She resolved to tell Dalton about the lunch, knowing he'd appreciate her honesty. Chapter 12. Confrontation. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Mira decided to bring up the lunch. "Dalton, I need to tell you something," she began cautiously. Dalton set his fork down, his expression immediately alert. "What is it?" "Selena invited me to lunch today, and Michael was there too. I wasn't expecting him, but I thought you should know." Dalton's eyes darkened, and his jaw clenched. "Why didn't Selena tell you he'd be there? Did he say anything inappropriate?" "No, not really," Mira replied. "He brought up some old memories, but I made it clear that my life is with you now." Dalton stood abruptly, pacing the room. "I knew it. He's trying to weasel his way back into your life. This isn't just coincidence, Mira. He's doing this on purpose." "Dalton, please calm down," Mira said, rising from her seat. "I handled it. I'm telling you because I want to be transparent with you. I don't want anything to come between us." Dalton turned to face her, his eyes blazing with emotion. "Mira, I trust you, but I don't trust him. I can't sit by and let him try to worm his way into our lives." Mira reached out, placing her hands on his chest. "Dalton, you're the only man I love. Don't let his actions create a wedge between us. We're stronger than this." Dalton's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he pulled her into his arms. "You're right. I'm sorry, Mira. I just can't stand the thought of losing you." "You never will," Mira whispered, holding him tightly. Though the confrontation ended in reconciliation, both Mira and Dalton knew that Michael's presence was a threat they couldn't ignore. The days after Mira's lunch with Selena and Michael passed with an uneasy calm. Dalton remained watchful, his protective instincts heightened, while Mira did her best to reassure him. Yet, beneath their attempts at normalcy, the shadow of Michael lingered. One evening, Dalton returned home earlier than usual. Mira was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Han, you're back early," she said, her voice warm but tinged with surprise. "I couldn't focus at work," Dalton admitted, loosening his tie as he approached her. "I've been thinking about everything." Mira paused, setting down her knife. "Dalton, we've talked about this. I don't want him coming between us." Dalton nodded, but his expression remained tense. "I trust you, Mira. It's him I don't trust. There's something about the way he looks at you. It's as if he's trying to rewrite the past." Mira sighed, wiping her hands on a towel before turning to face him. "Dalton, I chose you. I married you. Michael is a part of my past, but that's where he'll stay. Please don't let this eat away at you." Dalton pulled her into his arms, his embrace firm yet gentle. "I just don't want to lose you, Mira. You mean everything to me." "You won't lose me," she murmured against his chest. "You never will." That night, as they lay in bed, Dalton found himself unable to sleep. The thought of Michael's lingering presence gnawed at him, filling his mind with doubts and fears. Unbeknownst to him, Mira was also awake, wondering how long this unease would last. The tension between Dalton and Mira came to a head when Selena called Mira again, inviting her to another gathering. This time, Mira hesitated. "Selena, who else will be there?" she asked cautiously. "Oh, just a few old friends," Selena replied breezily. "Michael might drop by, but it's nothing formal." Mira's heart sank. "Selena, I'm not sure I can make it. Things have been a bit tense lately." "Tense? Is everything okay with you and Dalton?" Selena asked, her concern evident. "It's complicated," Mira admitted, her voice soft. "I'll let you know if I can come." After hanging up, Mira debated whether to tell Dalton about the call. She decided against it, not wanting to fan the flames of his jealousy. However, fate had other plans. Later that day, Dalton overheard Mira talking to Selena on the phone. When Mira entered the living room, Dalton was standing by the window, his arms crossed. "You're still in contact with Selena?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with tension. "Yes," Mira admitted. "She invited me to another gathering. I haven't decided if I'll go." Dalton's jaw tightened. And Michael will be there? He might be, Mira said, meeting his gaze. But I told Selena I wasn't sure about attending. Dalton shook his head, his frustration evident. Mira, don't you see what's happening? He's using Selena to stay close to you. This isn't just coincidence. Mira stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. Dalton, I didn't agree to go. I'll turn her down if it bothers you that much. It's not about whether you go or not, Dalton said, his voice rising slightly. It's about him constantly inserting himself into your life. I can't stand it. Their argument ended with Dalton storming out of the room, leaving Mira feeling frustrated and helpless. She knew he was acting out of love, but his jealousy was becoming a barrier between them. Determined to put an end to the tension, Mira decided to meet Selena and Michael one last time to set boundaries. She informed Dalton of her plan, reassuring him that she would handle the situation. I don't like it, Mira, Dalton said, his worry evident, but I trust you. Just be careful. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe. Selena greeted Mira warmly, while Michael's smile carried a hint of something more. Mira wasted no time getting to the point. Michael, I think we need to talk, she said, her tone firm. Michael raised an eyebrow. About what? About boundaries, Mira replied. I'm married to Dalton, and I'm happy. Whatever we had in the past is over, and it's important that you respect that. Michael's expression darkened slightly, but he nodded. I see. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Mira. I just thought we could reconnect as friends. We can't, Mira said bluntly. It's not appropriate, and it's not fair to Dalton. Selena, sensing the tension, tried to interject. Mira, I think you're overreacting. Michael's just being friendly. No, Selena, Mira said, her voice steady. This isn't about friendship. It's about respecting my marriage and my husband's feelings. Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze contemplative. I understand. I didn't mean to overstep. After the meeting, Mira felt a sense of relief, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's intentions weren't entirely innocent. When she returned home, she told Dalton everything. I made it clear to him, Mira said. There's nothing to worry about anymore. Dalton pulled her into his arms, his relief palpable. Thank you, Mira. I know this hasn't been easy. As they held each other, they both hoped that this would mark the end of Michael's interference. But deep down, they knew that the past had a way of lingering, and the road ahead might still hold challenges. Mira and Dalton settled into an uneasy truce after her conversation with Michael. Dalton seemed calmer, but Mira could sense his lingering doubt. She hoped time would heal the cracks Michael's reappearance had caused. One night, Mira awoke to the sound of Dalton moving around in their room. He was pacing near the window, the faint moonlight illuminating his tense figure. Dalton? Mira called softly, sitting up. He turned, his face clouded with worry. I couldn't sleep, he admitted. I keep thinking about him, about how close he came to disrupting everything we've built. Mira got out of bed and walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Dalton, you have nothing to fear. I've set boundaries. Michael knows there's no room for him in my life. Dalton sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know that, but the thought of him even trying to come between us, it drives me crazy, Mira. You're overthinking, she reassured him. Our love is stronger than anything he could attempt. Dalton finally nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. I just can't lose you. You mean the world to me. Then trust me, Mira whispered, her voice steady. We'll get through this together. A week later, Dalton and Mira were invited to a charity gala hosted by a prominent business group. As a power couple, their attendance was expected. Mira, dressed in an elegant midnight blue gown, drew the admiration of everyone in the room, but it was Dalton's proud gaze that mattered most to her. As they mingled with other guests, Mira felt a strange sense of unease. The reason for it became clear when she spotted Michael across the room, talking to a group of executives. Her heart sank. Dalton, she murmured, tugging at his sleeve. He followed her gaze, his his expression hardening instantly. "What's he doing here?" "I didn't know he'd be here," Mira said quickly, trying to defuse the tension. Dalton placed a protective hand on her back. "Let's keep our distance." Despite their efforts, Michael noticed them. His eyes lit up as he excused himself from his group and made his way toward them. "Dalton, Mira," Michael greeted, his tone overly friendly. "It's a pleasure to see you both here." "Michael," Dalton said coldly, his arm tightening around Mira's waist. Mira forced a polite smile. "Good evening, Michael." Michael's gaze lingered on Mira longer than Dalton liked. "Mira, you look stunning tonight. Dalton's a lucky man." "Yes, he is," Mira said firmly, stepping closer to her husband. The tension was palpable as Dalton stared at Michael, his jaw clenched. "Enjoy the evening, Michael," Dalton said curtly, steering Mira away. As they walked away, Dalton whispered, "I don't like the way he looks at you." "Let's not let him ruin our night," Mira replied, trying to focus on the positive. Dalton nodded, but Mira could feel his simmering anger. The gala's atmosphere grew heavier as the night wore on. Dalton and Mira stayed close, but the tension between them was undeniable. It reached its peak when Dalton saw Michael talking to Selena near the bar, glancing in their direction. Dalton couldn't hold back any longer. "I need to settle this," he muttered, heading toward Michael. "Dalton, no," Mira said, trying to stop him, but he was already striding away. Dalton approached Michael, his expression thunderous. "Michael, can we talk? Privately." Michael smirked, clearly enjoying Dalton's agitation. "Of course." They stepped into a side room, away from the crowd. Mira followed, unwilling to let things spiral out of control. "What is your problem, Michael?" Dalton demanded as soon as the door closed. "Why can't you leave Mira alone?" Michael raised his hands defensively. "I think you're overreacting, Dalton. Mira and I are just old friends." Friends don't show up uninvited to events or make unnecessary comments about someone's wife, Dalton shot back. Mira stepped forward, placing a hand on Dalton's arm. "Dalton, calm down." She turned to Michael, her expression firm. "Michael, I've made it clear where I stand. I'm asking you to respect that." Michael's smirk faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "I never intended to cause trouble, Mira. I guess I let nostalgia cloud my judgment." Dalton's glare didn't waver. "This ends now, Michael. Stay away from Mira and stay out of our lives." Michael nodded reluctantly. "I understand. I won't bother you again." With that, the confrontation ended and Michael left the room. Dalton exhaled sharply, his anger slowly dissipating. Mira turned to him, her eyes filled with both love and concern. "Dalton, you didn't have to do that." "I did," Dalton replied. "I needed to make it clear that no one messes with what's mine." Mira smiled softly, taking his hand. "You don't need to fight for me, Dalton. I'm already yours." They returned to the gala, their bond stronger for having faced the challenge together. For the first time in weeks, Mira felt a sense of closure, knowing that Michael was finally out of their lives. A week after the gala, life began to settle for Mira and Dalton. Dalton was more attentive than ever, and Mira was grateful for the peace. However, peace was fleeting in their lives. One morning, Mira was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the family, when Dalton walked in, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked tense, his brows furrowed as he listened. "Who's calling this early?" Mira asked, concerned. Dalton hung up, his expression grim. "It was from the office. Apparently, there's been some unpleasant news involving Michael." Mira froze, the knife she was using to slice fruit hovering midair. "What do you mean? Is he trying something again?" Dalton shook his head. "No, it's not about us. Apparently, he's been accused of embezzling funds from his company." Mira's eyes widened. "Embezzling? That doesn't sound like him. Are you sure?" Dalton leaned against the counter, rubbing his temple. "I'm not sure what to believe, but it's all over the news. If it's true, this could ruin him." Mira's mind spun. Despite everything, She couldn't help but feel a pang of pity. Michael had once been a close friend, and now his life seemed to be unraveling. Dalton noticed her hesitation and frowned. "Don't tell me you feel sorry for him." "It's not that," Mira replied quickly. I can't believe he would do something like this." "People change, Mira," Dalton said, his tone firm. "Whatever happens to him now, it's out of our hands." Mira nodded, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Later that afternoon, Mira received an unexpected visitor. The housekeeper informed her that Michael was waiting at the gate, requesting to speak with her. Dalton, who overheard, immediately bristled. "Absolutely not. He's not stepping foot in this house." Mira placed a calming hand on Dalton's arm. "Dalton, maybe he just wants to explain. I'll talk to him outside." "Mira," Dalton began, but she cut him off. "I won't let him come between us again. I'll handle this," she said firmly, stepping outside to meet Michael. Michael looked disheveled, a stark contrast to the confident man she had seen at the gala. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "Mira," he began, his voice heavy with desperation. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I need your help." Mira crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "Help? After everything, you're asking for my help?" "I didn't do it," Michael said quickly. "The accusations, the evidence, it's all fabricated. Someone is trying to destroy me, and I don't know who else to turn to." Mira studied him carefully. He seemed sincere, but she couldn't ignore the doubt in her heart. Why would someone frame you? Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "I don't know. Competitors, disgruntled employees. It could be anyone, but I need someone who believes in me, Mira. You were always the one who saw the good in people." Mira hesitated, torn between helping an old friend and respecting Dalton's wishes. "Michael, I can't get involved. My priority is my family, and Dalton wouldn't be comfortable with this." Michael's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I understand. I don't know what else to do." Mira sighed, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'll think about it, but I can't promise anything." "Thank you," Michael said, his voice filled with gratitude. "That's all I can ask for." As he left, Mira felt a storm brewing in her heart. That evening, Mira told Dalton about her encounter with Michael. As expected, he was furious. "You shouldn't have talked to him," Dalton said, pacing the living room. "He's trying to manipulate you, Mira." "He's desperate, Dalton," Mira replied, trying to explain. "What if he's telling the truth? What if someone really is framing him?" "Why does it matter to you?" Dalton demanded, his voice rising. "He's not your responsibility." Mira flinched at his tone but stood her ground. "I'm not saying I'll help him, but I can't just ignore him either. What if it were you in his position?" Dalton stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. "It wouldn't be me because I would never put myself in a position where people could question my integrity." "Dalton, please," Mira pleaded. "I need you to trust me." Dalton stared at her for a long moment before sighing deeply. "I do trust you, Mira, but I don't trust him." "I'll be careful," she promised, "but I can't turn my back on someone who might be innocent." Reluctantly, Dalton nodded. "Fine, but if he steps out of line even once, I'll handle it my way." "Agreed," Mira said, relieved to have his permission, even if it was begrudging. As they went to bed that night, the distance between them felt wider than ever. Mira prayed that her decision wouldn't come back to haunt her. Mira couldn't shake her encounter with Michael. His desperation had planted seeds of doubt in her mind. The next morning, as Dalton left for a business meeting, Mira decided to investigate. She contacted a trusted friend, Sophia, who worked in corporate law. Over coffee, Mira explained Michael's predicament. "Sophia, if someone were to frame someone for embezzlement, how would they go about it?" Mira asked. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "It's not easy, but it's possible. They need access to internal accounts, fake transactions, and fabricated documents." "Why? Do you know someone in trouble?" Mira hesitated. An old friend. He swears he's innocent, but I don't know if I can trust him. Sophia leaned forward. If he's innocent, the evidence will have inconsistencies. Have you seen the allegations or the reports? No, Mira admitted. I've only heard about it. Then don't jump to conclusions, Sophia advised. If you want, I can take a look. Just get me access to the details. Mira nodded, grateful for Sophia's offer. Thank you. I'll see what I can do. Later that day, Mira received an email from Michael. It contained copies of the allegations and financial reports. As she read through them, her unease grew. Some transactions seemed suspiciously convenient, as if designed to incriminate him. Mira forwarded the documents to Sophia, hoping for clarity. That evening, Dalton returned home earlier than expected. Mira was still reviewing the documents when he walked in. "What are you working on?" Dalton asked, noticing her distracted state. Mira hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Michael sent me some documents. I'm trying to figure out if he's being framed." Dalton's expression darkened instantly. "You're still talking to him?" "It's not what you think," Mira said quickly. "I'm not defending him, Dalton. I'm just trying to find the truth." "The truth?" Dalton scoffed. "Why does it matter to you? He's not our problem." Mira stood her ground. "It matters because I can't ignore someone in need, especially if they're innocent." Dalton's jaw clenched. "And what about us, Mira? What about our family? Does that matter to you?" "Of course it does," Mira shot back. "But helping Michael doesn't mean I'm choosing him over you." "It feels that way," Dalton muttered, his voice low but laced with anger. The tension between them was palpable. For the first time in their marriage, Mira felt as though an invisible wall had risen between them. "I'm doing this for me," Mira said softly, "because I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't try." Dalton stared at her for a long moment before turning away. "Do whatever you want, Mira, but don't expect me to support it." Mira watched him walk away, her heart heavy with the weight of their argument. The next day, Sophia called Mira with her findings. "You were right," Sophia said. "The evidence against Michael is flimsy at best. The transactions are inconsistent, and some of the documents were clearly altered." Mira felt a surge of relief. So he really might be innocent. "Yes, but proving it will be tricky," Sophia warned. "Whoever set this up covered their tracks well." Determined to help, Mira arranged to meet Michael in a public cafe. She shared Sophia's findings, and for the first time in weeks, Michael looked hopeful. "Thank you, Mira," he said sincerely. "You don't know how much this means to me." "You should thank Sophia," Mira replied. "She's the one who uncovered the inconsistencies. Now we need to figure out who's behind this." As they discussed their next steps, Dalton arrived unexpectedly. He had followed Mira, his suspicion finally boiling over. "So this is what you've been doing behind my back?" Dalton said coldly, his gaze shifting between Mira and Michael. Mira stood up quickly. "Dalton, it's not what you think. I was just—" "I don't want to hear it," Dalton snapped. "You said you wouldn't let him come between us, but here you are." Michael stood as well, his expression calm but firm. "Dalton, this isn't about you or Mira. I'm trying to clear my name." "I don't care what you're trying to do," Dalton retorted. "Stay away from my wife." "Dalton, stop!" Mira interjected, her voice breaking. "This isn't about choosing sides. I'm helping a friend in need, and if you can't see that, then maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Dalton looked at her, hurt flashing in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and left. Mira sat back down, her hands trembling. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted to Michael. "You will," Michael said quietly, "because you're stronger than you realize." As Mira watched Dalton's retreating figure, she prayed that their love would be strong enough to weather the storm. The days following Dalton's abrupt departure from the cafe were a blur for Mira. She had tried reaching out to him, but Dalton refused to take her calls or respond to her messages. The silence between them felt deafening, like a chasm growing wider by the second. Meanwhile, Mira continued working with Michael and Sophia to uncover the truth. The deeper they dug, the more apparent it became that someone within Michael's company was orchestrating the entire scheme. Suspicious names began to surface, executives with much to gain from Michael's downfall. At home, Mira felt Dalton's absence acutely. When he finally returned late one evening, his face was drawn with exhaustion and anger. "We need to talk," Mira said softly, blocking his way to the stairs. Dalton sighed, clearly reluctant. "About what? How you've been prioritizing Michael over us." "That's not fair," Mira shot back, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to do the right thing. You're the one shutting me out." Dalton's eyes flashed with hurt and frustration. "You don't see it, Mira. Every time you meet him, every time you defend him, it's like you're driving a wedge between us." "I'm not choosing him over you," she exclaimed, "but I can't ignore someone who needs help, especially when I know they're innocent." "And what about me?" Dalton asked, his voice breaking. "Don't I need you too?" The vulnerability in his tone stopped Mira in her tracks. She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. "Dalton, I love you. Nothing and no one can change that. But I can't turn my back on someone who's been wronged." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their emotions hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Dalton nodded, his walls cracking just enough for Mira to see the man she fell in love with. "I don't like it," he admitted. "But if it means that much to you, I'll try to understand." Mira hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Dalton. That's all I ask." With Dalton's begrudging support, Mira threw herself into unraveling the mystery. Sophia discovered that key documents tying Michael to the embezzlement had been submitted by an executive named Victor Delaney, a man with a reputation for underhanded tactics. "It's clear he's the one behind this," Sophia explained during a meeting with Mira and Michael. "But we need concrete proof to expose him." Michael's jaw tightened. "Victor always had it out for me. He probably saw me as a threat to his position." Sophia nodded. "We'll need to set a trap. If we can get Victor to admit his role, we can clear your name." The plan was risky, but Michael was determined. Using a hidden recorder, he arranged a private meeting with Victor. Mira watched anxiously from a nearby cafe, her heart pounding as Michael walked into the lion's den. Hours later, Michael returned with a triumphant smile. "We got him," he announced, playing back Victor's incriminating confession. Mira felt a wave of relief wash over her. "It's over," she whispered. "You can finally clear your name." But Sophia shook her head. "Not yet. We need to take this to the authorities and ensure it holds up in court." The next few days were a whirlwind. With Sophia's help, Michael presented the evidence to the board of directors and the police. Victor's schemes unraveled quickly, exposing a web of corruption that extended beyond Michael's case. At the company's headquarters, Michael faced the board one last time. Mira and Sophia sat in the audience, watching as he defended himself with poise and determination. By the end of the meeting, the board unanimously voted to reinstate Michael and issue a public apology for their hasty judgment. Victor, meanwhile, was arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Mira felt a surge of pride as she watched Michael walk out of the building, his head held high. "You did it," she said, hugging him tightly. "We did it," Michael corrected, his gratitude evident. With the ordeal behind them, Mira turned her attention back to her marriage. She planned a surprise dinner for Dalton, hoping to rekindle their bond. That evening, Dalton walked into a candlelit dining room, his eyes widening in surprise. "What's all this?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. Mira walked over, taking his hands in hers. "It's my way of saying thank you for trusting me, even when it wasn't easy." Dalton pulled her into his arms, his voice thick with emotion. "I was afraid of losing you, Mira, but I realize now that your heart is big enough to love me and still care for others." "You'll never lose me," Mira promised, her voice firm. "You're my home, Dalton. Always." They shared a tender kiss, the tension of the past weeks melting away. Later that night, as They sat on the couch. Dalton asked, "So, what's next for Michael?" Mira smiled. "He's starting over. He's stronger now, and I think he'll be okay." Dalton nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Good, because I don't want him coming back for any reason." Mira laughed, playfully swatting his arm. "Don't worry, Honorable, you'll always be the most important man in my life." As they laughed and held each other close, Mira knew they had weathered the storm together. And for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace, knowing that love and trust had triumphed over doubt and fear. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.